The rain is falling softly. The room is still, and tonight I'm here with you again. If you enjoy these quiet nights together, subscribe so I can read to you again tomorrow. By the way, what time is it where you are right now? I always wonder who else is awake with me at this hour. I remember the sound of the school bell more clearly than most voices from back then, that hollow clang that echoed off the courtyard walls and rang through your chest like it was reminding you that time was moving. It wasn't melodic, it wasn't warm, but it meant something. It meant you were part of something, a rhythm, a day, a season that would repeat whether you were ready or not. And somehow, I found comfort in that. School in the 80s had a certain texture, one that came not just from the chalk and dust, but from the way the world felt slower when you were inside those walls. The parquet in the halls creaked with a particular tone, tired but steady, like it had memorized every footstep that passed across it. My shoes always squeaked on the polished floor in autumn, especially after stepping through wet leaves. I hated that sound at the time. It made me feel like I stood out, like the hallway could hear my nervousness. But now, I miss it. That honest little sound that meant I was there, even if I didn't know who I was yet. I remember my backpack overstuffed, misshapen, smelling of pencil shavings, erasers, and the faint sweetness of an apple my mother always packed for me. Always a red one, always slightly bruised by lunchtime. I didn't appreciate it then, not really. But when I opened that zipper and caught the smell, there was something grounding in it. Familiar, soft. My classroom was on the second floor, by the windows that overlooked the playground. The desks were wooden, scratched with initials and the occasional heart. The chairs wobbled slightly if you leaned too far back, and the blackboard had a permanent smudge in the top left corner, no matter how many times it was cleaned. We'd sit in those chairs half asleep in the early hours, our jackets still cold from the outside, and listen to the teacher's voice mixing with the sound of chalk dragging across the board. There was something meditative in that. Not the words, I can't tell you much about the lessons, but the rhythm. The scratch of chalk, the tap of a ruler, the soft coughs and chair creaks, all becoming part of the room's quiet conversation. Mornings felt sacred in their own way, like the world hadn't quite begun yet. And when I think about those days now, it's not the grades or subjects I return to, but the feeling of sitting by the window with cold hands, watching the trees sway, waiting for a reason to speak. No one had phones. We passed notes, folded like little triangles, slid across desks, under the teacher's gaze. Sometimes they said nothing important, just, "Are you bored?" or "Want to trade sandwiches?" But even that meant something. A moment shared. A small reminder that you weren't alone in your head. Today, schools are different. Sleeker, faster, better lit. But I wonder if the silence between the bells still exists. The kind of silence where you learned not just math or language, but yourself. The kind where a red apple in your backpack wasn't just a snack, it was a tether. To home, to care, to something you didn't yet know you'd one day miss. There was a moment each morning, just after we arrived and just before the first class began, when the school felt like it was holding its breath. The corridors were still waking up fluorescent lights, buzzing to life one by one, lockers rattling open with that unmistakable metal groan, and the muffled thump of feet on the stairs. Jackets hung heavily on the hooks outside the classroom, still damp from the morning fog or the thin drizzle that always seemed to find us in October. There was something about the smell of those jackets, a mix of old wool, rain, soap, and playground dust, that made the hallway feel like a lived-in story, like everyone brought a little piece of home with them and left it there until the bell rang again. The walls were tiled halfway up, pale green with chips at the corners, and sometimes you'd find yourself leaning against them without realizing, feeling the cool ceramic through your shirt, grounding yourself before another slow hour of cursive practice or geography. And from the far end of the hallway, always around the same time, came the smell of lunch being prepared in the school kitchen. It wasn't glamorous boiled potatoes, cabbage, sometimes rice with that overcooked sausage that squeaked when you bit into it, but the scent drifted gently through the building, anchoring you. It meant someone somewhere was thinking about feeding you. It meant warmth was coming. Recess was its own kind of symphony. The clatter of chairs being pushed back, the stomp of shoes rushing toward the door. Someone always shouted too loud. Someone always slipped just outside on the wet concrete. And the teachers, coats buttoned, arms crossed, stood in the corners, watching like sentinels, letting us burn off whatever we couldn't say in words. I remember the sound of chalk being wiped from the blackboard behind a closed door, the hum of the radiator that only worked when it wanted to, and the distant, hopeful ring of the second bell, the one that said, "Time to come back in. Time to sit again. Time to pretend the room wasn't still echoing with your name or someone else's laugh." But in between all that, there were those tiny, secret silences. The kind you only notice when you're a kid, when time hasn't yet sped up. Standing in front of your locker, twisting the stiff metal handle, holding a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, still warm from home. Sitting on a bench in the coat room, untying your wet shoelaces, listening to your own breath. I don't think I knew it then, but those moments were teaching me something. That not everything meaningful comes with noise. That some of the most real things in life arrive like steam on a window, slowly, softly, asking nothing but that you notice. These days, when I pass by a school on my walk to work, I still listen. Sometimes I hear echoes, laughter in the cold air, the squeak of a door, the rush of boots across pavement, and I stop just for a second. Just long enough to remember what it was like to live between the walls and the weather, carrying a bruised apple, listening for a bell, not knowing yet how precious the quiet could be. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because we always had math first period, and I was dreading the quiz, but when I woke up that morning, the world had gone quiet, in a way only snow can bring. Not a soundless quiet, but that deep, cotton-soft hush that settles over everything like a hand gently placed on your shoulder. I pulled back the heavy brown curtain in my room and stared out into the white. The trees in the courtyard were dusted like pastries. The swings in the playground behind the building hung still, each seat catching flakes in its own little cradle. The parked cars looked unfamiliar, softened, as if winter had come not to erase, but to remind. It snowed in the 80s, like it meant something. Big, slow flakes that didn't hurry to reach the ground. There was no forecast app, no school alert in your pocket, just your mother standing at the stove saying, "Maybe they'll cancel the first few classes." That hope, that maybe, was magic. I dressed in layers 2 sweaters, the itchy one underneath and the stretched one on top, and the thick blue jacket that smelled like the closet. The zipper always stuck halfway up, and my father would have to come in and fix it with calm fingers, without saying much. There was something reassuring in that gesture, the way he never rushed, never sighed. Just tugged gently until it gave. The walk to school was different that morning. The usual gray of concrete and noise of buses was replaced with a soft crunch underfoot and the muffled chatter of boots on fresh snow. No one rushed. Even the late ones walked slowly, as if the world had asked for a bit more reverence. Kids tested their footprints in the untouched sidewalks. Someone tried to catch snowflakes on their tongue. No one really wanted to go inside. When we got to the schoolyard, the bell hadn't rung yet, but the teachers were already outside, bundled in their long coats, eyes half amused, half resigned. One of them, the younger math teacher, the one who always wore the same red scarf, said, "Come on, 5 more minutes, then in." But we knew what that meant. It was permission, and 5 minutes became 10. Maybe more. I remember standing with Ninad, my classmate, watching the sky. They say if the snowflakes stick to your sleeve without melting, it's good luck, he whispered. I didn't know where he heard it, but I held out my arm anyway. And when one landed whole, delicate, a perfect tiny star, we both just stood there and watched it slowly fade into my sleeve. We didn't laugh. We didn't say anything else. It was just a moment. Inside, the radiators were working too hard, gurgling and popping like old men clearing their throats. Our boots steamed at the door. The floor became slippery with melted trails. Someone threw a snowball at the window during second period and got detention. But the magic didn't leave. That day stayed different. Not because anything big happened, but because the snow had changed the rules. Time slowed down. Words softened. And for once, we didn't mind sitting near the window, not listening to the teacher, watching the world carry on in white. Today, when it snows, if it snows, I find myself standing by the window like I did back then, with a cup of coffee instead of a backpack, waiting for that same silence to return. And when it does, I let it. Because some things don't need to be remembered through photos or stories. They live in the air, in the cold, in the stillness between flakes, and in those rare mornings when the world forgets how to be fast. I feel like that kid again, sleeve out, eyes up, waiting for luck to land quietly, without needing to last. School felt different right before New Year's. The air, the light, even the quiet between classes changed, as if the building itself understood something was coming to an end. December days moved slower. The classroom seemed softer, somehow warmer, though not just because of the radiators. There was a hush, a gentle anticipation, like everything was holding its breath before a long exhale. We made decorations in those days. Paper snowflakes cut with dull scissors, always a little crooked, always slightly torn at the edges. No one minded. Glitter stuck to our fingers, our sweaters, our hair, little traces of something joyful that followed you home and showed up days later in coat pockets and under fingernails. The teacher would play an old cassette quietly in the background, soft instrumental songs that didn't distract, only wrapped the room in a kind of hush. We took turns, drawing on the chalkboard snowmen that looked like penguins, Christmas trees that leaned to one side, stars with too many points. The windows were painted with tempera thick blue, and white brushstrokes that dried slowly overnight and left behind translucent halos like frost. Outside, the snow had already turned gray from passing cars. But from inside, through our imperfect artwork, the world still looked clean and soft. We were warm, not just from heat, but from something deeper. From the feeling that home was near, that winter break was coming, that maybe, just maybe, something you quietly wished for might arrive. We didn't write letters to Santa. Or if we did, we didn't talk about it. Our wishes lived inside us, silent, private, fragile. That year, I wished for a radio. Not a big one, not one with knobs for every band, but a small one, the kind that fit in your hand, with headphones that always got tangled. I imagined walking through snow with music in my ears, my own secret world playing just for me. I never told anyone, not my parents, not my friends. I just stood by the window between two painted snowflakes and held the wish gently in my chest, like something that might break if spoken aloud. Today, when I pass by a school in December, I still see drawings on the windows. Maybe they're stickers now, bought from shops, all matching. Maybe no one uses paint anymore. Maybe the music comes from a playlist instead of a tape. But part of me still believes that somewhere in those hallways there's a group of children with glue on their sleeves and glitter in their hair, dreaming small dreams they'll carry with them for years. I didn't get the radio that year. I got a book, some chocolate, and a thick wool sweater that itched around the neck. I wasn't disappointed. I don't know why. Maybe it was enough to wish. Maybe it was enough just to believe that something was coming, even if it didn't arrive in a box. I remember sitting by the window that afternoon, gently turning one of the painted snowflakes so it wouldn't fall, and whispering to no one, maybe next year. And somehow, that was enough. It wasn't a special day. Not on the calendar, not in the weather, not in anything we did at school. It was just one of those afternoons in late fall, the kind where the sky turned gray too early, and the cold didn't come with snow, just that biting dampness that clings to your sleeves and finds its way into your bones. I was 12, maybe 13, old enough to carry my books without needing help, but not quite old enough to understand how much I'd miss those walks home. It had rained earlier, not heavily, just enough to make the streets shine under the dull light. Puddles collected in the cracked pavement. The trees had lost most of their leaves, and the few that remained clung on in orange and brown clusters, shaking quietly in the wind like they didn't want to let go yet. I walked slower that day. I don't know why. My backpack bounced rhythmically with every step, filled with notebooks and crumpled papers, a math test with a red mark on top, and the sandwich I hadn't touched during break. The streets were mostly empty. A few parents waiting near cars, the occasional bark of a dog behind a gate, but otherwise, just quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own footsteps, the scrape of your shoes, the soft rustle of your coat. I remember walking past the bakery on the corner, the windows fogged with steam, the smell of fresh bread cutting through the cold like a blanket. I paused there for a moment, watching the baker inside shaping dough, his hands moving without thought, like he was folding memory into flour. I didn't go in. I didn't have any money that day. but I stood there longer than I should have, just breathing it in. And then I kept walking, past the old fence with the missing slat, past the tree with initials carved so deep they'd outlived the ones who made them. Everything looked the same, but somehow that afternoon felt slower, heavier, as if the world had thickened around me. And in that heaviness, I felt a kind of quiet awareness, like life was opening a small door I didn't yet know how to walk through. I reached home, just as the first lights came on in the windows. The hallway smelled like boiled potatoes and damp coats. My mother was in the kitchen, humming something without melody. She looked up when I entered, smiled without words, and returned to stirring the pot. I took off my jacket, hung it on the same hook I always used, and stood there a moment, holding the stillness. I didn't say anything about my day. She didn't ask. But in that silence, something passed between us, a kind of understanding that didn't need explaining. That afternoon never made it into a diary. I never told anyone about it, but it lives in me. In the way I still slow down when it rains, in the way I pause outside bakeries, even now, in the way I sometimes wish I could walk home again with heavy shoes, cold fingers, and the feeling that something unspoken was just beginning to take shape in me. Not joy, not sadness, just presence. And even now, that's enough to remember. There was a girl in my class who sat 2 rows to the left, near the window. I don't remember her last name now, only that her first name was Anna, and she had a blue pencil case with tiny white stars on it. The zipper was always half stuck, and she used a paper clip to pull it open. She had this way of tucking her hair behind one ear when she was concentrating, then immediately shaking it loose again, like she regretted the decision. I didn't talk to her much, not out of shyness exactly, but because I didn't know what I could say that wouldn't feel too loud in the quiet rhythm of school days. Back then, feelings weren't something we knew how to speak about. They just existed quietly, like the hum of a radiator or the smell of pencil shavings in the air. I'd notice her in small ways. The way she pressed too hard when she wrote, leaving deep grooves in her paper. How she sometimes looked outside the window during math class, her eyes far away, as if she were listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. And sometimes, just sometimes, when a joke passed through the classroom and everyone laughed, I'd glance her way not to see if she laughed too, but to see how. Once, during a group project, we were assigned to the same table. It was geography. We were supposed to draw a river system. She sketched the curves while I labeled the towns. We barely spoke. But when her pencil broke, I passed her mine without a word, and she looked at me, really looked, and said, "Thanks," in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. That single word stayed with me longer than anything else we learned that year. It wasn't love. It wasn't even infatuation. It was something smaller, more tender. A quiet recognition, a shared understanding that something passed between us, brief but real. After that, I found myself noticing things. I knew when she had a new eraser. I knew she preferred blue ink. I knew she chewed on her sleeve when she was nervous before a test. And once, only once, as we were leaving class, she said, "You're always quiet," and smiled like it wasn't a criticism, but a compliment. I didn't reply. I just smiled back. And that was enough. These days, when I think of childhood crushes, I don't remember heartbreak or drama. I remember those kinds of silences. The way we learned to feel without labels. How a glance could carry more weight than a letter. How affection was something you lived with, not acted on a soft presence that stayed in your chest long after the person was gone. I don't know where she is now. I haven't seen her in decades. But sometimes, when I find an old notebook, or hear the soft zip of a pencil case being opened, I'm back in that classroom chalk dust in the air, low winter light on the floor, and Ana sitting 2 rows to the left near the window. And I remember how much beauty there was in not needing more than a single word and a shared table to make you feel, for a moment, quietly seen. The last day of school never felt the way we expected it to. We thought it would be all freedom and shouting and the thrill of running out the door. But it wasn't. Not really. It was slower, quieter, almost gentle. That morning the hallways echoed in a different way, not from the usual shuffle of shoes and dropped books, but from the kind of stillness that comes when people are too aware of time. Desks were half emptied. Books had been returned. Chalkboards were clean for once, except for a few farewell messages scribbled in colored chalk hearts, initials, smiley faces with lopsided grins. The windows were open, letting in the warm air of early June. It carried the sound of birds and the occasional laugh from outside. But mostly, there was a softness in the light, a kind of closing. We didn't have a ceremony, just a normal day cut short, a few short lessons, some last reminders, then the words, "You're free to go." I remember looking around at everyone, half expecting someone to cheer, but no one did. We just sat there for a moment, not ready to stand. My desk was scratched with marks I didn't make, but had grown used to a little star carved near the corner, a faint crack that split the wood diagonally. It had become familiar, safe. I traced my fingers across it, not thinking, just remembering, without trying. Around me, kids were gathering their things. The girl who always borrowed pens folded her timetable in half and tucked it into her pocket. Someone was taking down drawings from the corkboard near the door. Chairs scraped back, slowly. I stood up too, my backpack lighter than usual, and walked out into the hallway where the smell of dust and floor polish mixed with warm air and something else I couldn't name. Something final. My favorite teacher, the one who taught literature and never raised his voice, stood by the door, arms crossed loosely. He said goodbye to each of us with a small nod, not overly warm, but sincere. When I passed, he said, "Take your time this summer." That was all. But the way he said it, like he knew how fast life would get, made me pause. I said thank you, quietly, and stepped out into the sun. Outside, everything looked sharper. The trees greener, the sky wider. It felt like the first time I was really seeing the school from the outside, not just as a building, but as something I was now leaving behind, a chapter, a rhythm, a version of myself. I walked home slowly that day, letting the warmth settle on my arms, listening to the sound of my own footsteps on the sidewalk. It didn't feel like an ending. Not yet. That would come later in the middle of a new year, or in the moment I'd hear a certain song on the radio and feel something shift in my chest. But still, something in me knew. That part of my life was gently closing its book. These days, when I smell hot dust on pavement or hear the echo of an empty classroom, I go back to that last day, the stillness, the open windows, the desks that knew our names. And I remember, not all goodbyes are loud. Some are soft enough to miss, unless you're really listening. Some come with birdsong and open doors, and a teacher who says just one sentence, and somehow that's what stays with you. It's strange, the things you carry without knowing. You grow up, get older, fill your life with bills and keys and passwords and clocks that blink too fast. And still, somewhere in the quiet corners of your day, little pieces of the past keep showing up, not to interrupt, just to be near. I notice it most in the small moments. When I'm walking home from the store with my hands deep in my coat pockets, and the air smells like damp leaves and far-off chimney smoke. When I hear a bicycle tire click on the pavement behind me. Or when I pass a schoolyard in the late afternoon and catch the distant sound of children laughing, running, calling each other by names only they understand. I always slow down then, not out of nostalgia, not exactly, but out of recognition. Like hearing a language you once spoke fluently and still understand, even if your tongue has forgotten how to form the words. My life now is quiet in a different way. My apartment is small, neat, filled with soft light and fewer things than I used to think I needed. I keep a small wooden radio on the shelf. It doesn't pick up much, but when it works, the static between stations reminds me of cold mornings in school halls, chalk dust in the air, and the soft echo of boots on linoleum. I don't play music all the time. I like the silence, but it's not empty. It hums. It remembers. Sometimes I'll sit with a cup of tea and glance toward the window the way I used to in class, and I'll think of Ana with the star-covered pencil case, of the smell of wet jackets in the hallway, of the lost bell that never quite sounded like freedom, just change. I don't try to relive those days. I don't need to. They live in me already, in the way I organize my desk, in how I press too hard when I write, in how I still think in seasons, not quarters. There's a part of me that still walks that same road home, with heavy shoes and a head full of unspoken questions. And I've come to understand that's okay. That's how memory works, not to trap you, but to accompany you, to whisper gently, "You've been here before. You learned how to be in the world once, and you can learn again. The world is louder now, faster, but there are still places where the old quiet slips through early mornings, train rides, rainy windows, the pause between turning a page and reading the next. I live for those moments. I trust them. They remind me that I wasn't just a child once I was present, and I can be present again. So tonight, if the world feels too fast, too sharp, too bright, sit with me a while. Breathe. Let the quiet find you. The kind that carries the smell of old pencil cases and the rhythm of chalk on the board. The kind that wraps around you, not to hold you back, but to remind you where you began, and that you're still becoming, still walking, still here.